Hi everybody and welcome to Bless Essential, and thank you for joining me this week. If it is your first time visiting this channel, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell button, be notified of every video that I do. Like, comment, stay tuned and be blessed. So this week's topic is humility, or as it's titled here, is gentleness, which is the same meaning as part of the fruit of the Spirit series. And this aspect of the fruit of the Spirit has been known by different names. Some use the word gentleness, some use meekness, but whatever the word that's used, it always translates to the word humility. And, when we look in the King James Version of Galatians 5 and it's in 23, and the word is meekness, and the meaning behind it in the Greek is prahoutes, which means gentleness, meekness, and humility. And then even to look at it from a basic perspective, from an English dictionary level, the word humility means freedom from pride and arrogance, and someone that doesn't believe they are better than someone else. And just as last week, as we did with our last aspect of the fruit of the Spirit last week, the best example when we're looking at the fruit of the Spirit is to look at God himself. And Philippians 2 verse 7 and 8 puts it perfectly. It says, "But he," which is God, when he came down to earth as Jesus Christ, "made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men, and be found in the fashion as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to the death, even the death of the cross." So even though he's God, even though he's all powerful, all knowing, and he's everywhere, and he's the ruler of the entire universe, he still showed humility. So if God can show humility, what about us? Where do we stand? And even when he came to earth, as we know, he wasn't born in a palace. He was born in the ghetto of Nazareth, to the point where people were saying, can any good thing come from Nazareth? Because that's how ghetto it was in those days. He wasn't born in a nice hospital in those days. He was born in a manger amongst animals. And he didn't come to be served, but he came to serve. And, when I think about this, it reminds me of the film Coming to America, where Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall, they leave their palace, like they're royalty, and they leave Zamunda to come all the way to America in Queens, New York. And they're living in the most ghetto part. They're living in a rat-infested apartment. When a man showed them around, there used to be a crime scene. There's a body there and everything. And they were living well below their means. Prince Hakeem humbled himself. And then even when he goes to Mr. McDowell's house, and they see Mr. McDowell showing him about his house, and Mr. McDowell said, with a lot of good work one day, this could be you. And then Hakeem just says, oh, could be. Bearing in mind he's a prince, he's got all the money in the world. As Mr. Dowell says, the boy got his own money, but he stood there in all humility and just didn't say anything because he had nothing to prove. And this is what humility is. And when we're in the kingdom of God, this is what we have to demonstrate. It's part of the fruit of the Spirit, and it's something that we have to show and demonstrate. When the Bible speaks about humility, most times it will always say, humble yourself. So you got to do the humbling of your own self. James 4 verse 10 says, humble yourselves before the Lord. 1 Peter 5 verse 6 says, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God. Philippians 2 says that he, Jesus, humbled himself. 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14 says, if my people who are called by their names will humble themselves. And there's about 28 verses which talk about humility, which all reference or talk or work in conjunction with humbling yourself. And I was taught from a young age. I remember going to Gibson Road, Elder McLean classes, that we should never pray for God to humble us. We have to humble ourselves, because if God was to ever humble you, you would definitely know about it. We see an example with Nebuchadnezzar, where God puts him for 7 years, turns him literally into a beast, into an animal. So it's not for God to humble you, because if God humbles you, my gosh, it's for you to humble yourself. And whilst we might need God's help in terms of identifying, do I need to humble myself? Do I have a level of arrogance? Do I have a level of pride? God can make us aware of it, but it's for us to make the decision to humble ourselves. And the Bible said that whoever humbles himself will be exalted in due season, but whoever exalts himself will be humbled. When we have humility, we're not afraid to show our scars and show people what we've been through in our past. Jesus says, as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man also be lifted up. Now, in the wilderness, the children of Israel were bitten by snakes or vipers, and God says to them, get a brazen serpent and put the serpent onto a stick and lift up the stick and lift up the serpent. And when the people who have been bitten by snakes will look at the serpent, they're going to receive healing. So basically what it meant is the very thing that the people were struggling with, snakes and vipers, when they looked up and saw the very thing that they were struggling with, they received healing. So then Jesus too was lifted up. Jesus came and he took upon the sins of the world, and he was lifted up on the cross. And we as mankind were suffering with sin ourselves. So the thing that we were struggling with, which was sin, when we look to Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our faith, who took upon sin, and we look upon that, that's when we get our healing, that's when we get our restoration and our deliverance from sin itself. It took real humility for Jesus to die on the cross. You know, if you look at the whole stages, they arrested him on false charges, but he humbled himself and he allowed them to arrest him. In the Bible, when they were in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they came to arrest him, he just spoke a few words and they fell to the ground. That's the power that he had. But he humbled himself and allowed himself to be arrested. When they brought in false witnesses and they lied about him, he humbled himself and did not respond a word to defend himself. They spat upon his face and they beat him up, but he humbled himself and he didn't fight back. They mocked him and put a purple robe over his shoulders and put a crown of thorns on his head. But he humbled himself and he allowed it to happen. They stripped him naked and tried to humiliate him, but he humbled himself and he endured the cross and despised the shame. They taunted him and said, if you're who you say you are, come down from the cross and save yourself. You can save others, why not save yourself? But he humbled himself and interceded on their behalf and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they did. When death tried to take him, he humbled himself, because death could not take him, because he's the resurrection and the life. But he humbled himself and he himself gave up the ghost. And that's the real form of humility. And everything that he did was in humility. And even when he rose up from the dead, he showed his scars to people and let them see where he came from and his experiences. But we don't want to share our scars with people. We don't want to let people know what we've experienced and what we've been through. And really because of pride and arrogance, because we want people to see us or perceive us in a certain way, and we want to protect our own image. But when we humble ourselves for his glory, not to preserve our own glory on the earth, this is the fruit of the Spirit. Because the reality is this: the children of Israel were struggling from the snake bites, and they were able to look up at the brazen serpent to receive healing. Mankind was suffering in sin, and we're able to look to Jesus, who is the author of the finisher of our faith, who took upon sin, and that's how we get our restoration. And there are people out there that are struggling with certain issues, or whatever the issue may be, and the very thing that they're struggling with right now are the very things that we've struggled with in the past. But if we would allow ourselves to be lifted up and put into a position where people can look up to us and see our scars, and to see what we've been through and see the power of God, where God took us from and where we are now, they too will get the strength and have the ability to be delivered from the very thing that we once went through ourselves. But that can only happen if we have a level of humility and we allow people to see our scars in our life. One aspect of humility, when I was looking into this and researching it, is having a level of gentleness or leniency when it comes to pronouncing judgment or delivering judgment. Last year, one of the MPs, I believe it was Dominic Cummings, correct me if I'm wrong. If you remember early last year, we had the lockdown rules, and he was one of the people that broke the rules and the regulations. And in that time, there was an interview by Matthew Hancock where he was calling for his resignation, saying, well, he has to resign, he has to resign. Now, Matthew Hancock's response had no gentleness, had no leniency, and had no humility. And the reason why he was speaking that way, was because he was arrogant, was because he was prideful, because in his own mind, this could never happen to me. I would never do that. And because he did that, now it's happened to Matthew Hancock himself, and now it's happened to him where he's been caught, obviously, with that woman having an affair. Everyone now is calling that he must resign too, because he set the standard by opening up his own mouth and speaking judgment without any form of humility. But the reality is this, and I'm not sure, we don't know, but maybe if he had a little bit of humility, maybe if he showed a bit of gentleness in his response and how he treated Dominic Cummings, if it was him, maybe the public would have showed him more leniency to himself. Because after all, we know that Boris Johnson was willing to let it go and let him off. And the reality is this: never be so arrogant in life. When we look at other people when they fall and make a mistake, never be so arrogant in life to think that that can never happen to me. Because the reality is this: the very thing that we judge people on, and the very level of judgment that we pronounce upon people, that very well could happen to ourselves, or even worse, to your family members, to your children, to your wife, to your spouse, to your close friends and loved ones. And if you open your mouth too quickly and don't have any form of gentleness or leniency or humility, the same judgment that you're pronouncing on other people will be pronounced upon your loved ones or even yourself. So show humility when people do fall and make mistakes, because it could happen to us, happen to you. When we have humility, we don't have to show everyone what we know or what we can do or how much we have, with the mind to make ourselves to look better than other people. There's a TV show I was watching years ago, or was it last year, I don't know, called Game of Thrones. And in Game of Thrones, you had the Queen Daenerys, the Queen of Dragons, and just for today, I'll paraphrase, she goes to a foreign land to do business. So let's say, for example, she's the Queen of England. She goes to Germany to speak to the King of Germany. And as she goes to Germany, everyone assumes that she can't speak German, but she can. But she has a level of humility where she doesn't need to tell everybody that she can speak German. She's happy for people to think that she's only here in her level of intelligence and in her level of speech in German. And when she gets there, she's given a translator as well. Now, the king gives her a translator, and he has a court of many people around as he's conversing with the queen, and he's constantly and consistently mocking her and calling her a tramp, calling all these kind of names in German, because he thinks that obviously she doesn't understand because she can't speak German. And this goes on for days and days and days, but she remains humble. She could have said something. She could have said, I know German, I know what you're saying about me, but she remains humble and doesn't say a word. Now it comes to the last day of her visit, and the deal's done now. She wants to get the army of the Sullied army, and as she's about to leave, before everybody, the king's mocking her one last time, saying she's an idiot, she's foolish, she doesn't know anything, she's a woman. And then she begins to open her mouth and she speaks fluent German, and everyone's like, whoa. Everyone's taken back because they had no idea she could speak German. And after all, who would sit there for a number of days and be insulted to your face and not say anything? A person who has humility, who has nothing to prove. And she begins to speak, to their shock. She finishes the deal, and ultimately she kills the king. And this is the thing: when you have humility, you understand that not everything that's spoken against you, when people speak against you, when people try to assassinate your character, you understand that not everything requires a response immediately or requires a response at all, because you're humble. You know who you are, and you've got nothing to prove to anybody else, because you've got a level of humility and gentleness in your character. But when you have no humility and you're full of pride, you've got this need to show people what you can do. You've got this need to show people what you know. You've got this need to tell people that they're wrong in their perception of you, because you've got this need to fulfill your pride and fulfill your arrogance. But humility, that's the fruit of the Spirit. And lastly, I just want to talk on what humility is not, because sometimes we have this thing of false humility, where people talk negatively about themselves and say that they're nothing and I can't do this and I can't do that. And they think by doing that, that's being humble, by saying what you can't do. but it's not. It's false humility. I remember being in church young and people would say things in church like, don't call me to testify, don't call me to lead service, don't call me to preach or to pray. I'm not this, I can't do this, I can't do that. And people thought that was humility. And on the flip side of it, if you were to say, yeah, call me, I'll pray, I'll lead service, I'll preach. If you said that, it's almost perceived that you're arrogant, you think you're too good. But that's not arrogance. Humility is literally being who God says you are, not above what God says you are, not beneath what God says you are, but exactly who God says you are. So you literally just repeat what God says about you, and you literally live your life according to what God says about you. God says, I know the thoughts I have towards you, thoughts of good, not of evil, to bring you to an expected end. So what you do is literally repeat what God has for you and live out your life according to God's will. That is real humility. When we look in the Bible, people wanted to kill Jesus because he didn't have a false humility, because what they perceived to be humility, they didn't believe Jesus had. When you look at Jesus throughout the scripture, he says that I am. People will think this is arrogance, but he's literally just saying who he is. He's literally saying what God says about him. And when you look for the scripture, he says that I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am the resurrection and the life, I am the way, the truth and the life, I am the vine, I am, and before Abraham was, I am. And the last one I said is when he said that before Abraham was, I am. When the people heard this, they wanted to stone him and kill him, because in their mind, this is arrogance and there's no humility. But it wasn't arrogant, because he's literally just saying who he is. And this is the danger sometimes when you're a child of God and you're a real child of God and you're really showing the fruit of the Spirit. People will look at you and might think that you're arrogant because you're just saying who God says you are. You're just living your life according to what God has for you. And people will look at you, think you're too good. You think that you're better than everybody else because of your lifestyle, but it's not. You're just living your life according to what God says about you. That is humility. So as you look at yourself right now and look into your life, ask yourself the question, do I have humility? Or do I have the need to let people know what I know? If people have a perception about me, do I feel the need to put them wrong? If people think I'm here, but I'm really here, do I feel the need to correct them? Or am I like Jesus, where people can say what they want about me? You can talk about me what you want. I don't need to say anything. I don't need to defend myself because I already know who I am. Do you be like Hakeem from Coming to America, where you can humble yourself? Although you're a prince, you're a holy nation, a peculiar people, are you still able to humble yourself amongst people? And again, when people think that they're better than you, do you need to let them know that you're better than them in a certain area of your life? Or are you happy for them to let them think that they know more than you, or they've got more money than you, or they're better than you? Do you have humility? Or do you have a false humility where you keep saying to people, I'm nothing, I'm not this, I'm not that? Or do you have the real humility where you just say who God says you are, where you walk into the will of God for your life? That is true humility. So God bless you this week, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Join me next week, which will be the final week, where we'll be talking about self-control or temperance. And if this video has blessed you, feel free to like, comment and share, and we'll see you next week. God bless you.